Before you sleep, let me tell you about a summer in London, well over 150 years ago, when a whole neighborhood began to die, and one quiet doctor saved it, not with medicine, but with a map. This is not a story of horror, though it begins in one. It is, in the end, a story of someone who looked at a thing everybody else was sure they understood, and had the courage to say, gently, "I think we have this wrong." It is the year 1854. The place is Soho, a crowded working district near the heart of London. And the thing that comes for it, that summer, is cholera. If you have never seen what cholera does, be glad. It is one of the swiftest killers there is. A person can be perfectly well at breakfast and gone before the next morning. It empties the body of water with terrible speed until the skin goes cool and gray, and the strength simply drains away. In those days, there was no treatment that worked, and no real understanding of where it came from. There was only the dread of it, moving house to house, and the carts that came after. And here is the thing that everyone, almost everyone, believed about why it came. They believed it was carried on the air. They called it miasma, bad air, a poisonous mist that rose from filth and rot and open drains, and that you breathed in and sickened from. It was the settled science of the day. The smell of a place was thought to be the danger itself, and you can understand why they believed it. London, in those years, was a city that genuinely stank. The river was an open sewer. The streets were foul. Where the air was worst, the sickness often was too. So the theory seemed to fit. Clean the air, mask the smell, and you would be safe. Nearly every doctor in the country agreed. Nearly every doctor, but not one. His name was John Snow. He was a careful, watchful, rather private man, the son of a laborer who had risen by sheer diligence to become one of the most respected physicians in London. He was a pioneer of anesthesia. He had given chloroform to Queen Victoria herself to ease the birth of her child, which tells you the standing he had. When John Snow spoke, serious people listened, and John Snow did not believe in bad air. He had studied cholera for years, and the miasma theory simply did not match what he saw. If it were the air, he reasoned, why did it so often strike the gut first, and not the lungs? Why did one house sicken, and the house beside it, breathing the very same air, stay well? He had come to a different, and at the time almost heretical, idea. He thought cholera was not breathed at all. He thought it was swallowed. He thought it was something in the water. He had argued this for years in papers, to little effect. The theory of bad air was too comfortable, too established. What he needed was proof. And in the last days of August, in 1854, in the worst possible way, the proof came to find him. Because the outbreak that began that week started a few short streets from his own door. It began near a place called Broad Street, and it was like nothing anyone had seen. In the space of about 10 days, in that one small cluster of streets, some 500 people died. Whole families, in a matter of hours. The district emptied as those who could flee, fled. To everyone around him, it was a visitation, a poison in the Soho air. To John Snow, it was something else. It was a question with an answer, and the answer was close enough to walk to. So he walked. This is the part that changed medicine forever, and it sounds almost too simple. He did not sit and theorize. He went out into the dying streets day after day, and he gathered facts. For every single death, he found the address. And then he did something that almost no one had thought to do before. He drew a map. On a plain street map of the neighborhood, he marked every death. A small black mark at every address where someone had died. A stack of little bars growing taller wherever the dying was worst. He was not painting a picture of fear. He was letting the dead quietly point. And when the map was finished, they pointed at one thing. The marks clustered, thick and dark, around a single spot, a public water pump on Broad Street, where the people of those streets came all day long to fill their pails and pitchers. The further you lived from that one pump, the fewer the deaths. The closer you drew to it, the more they crowded in. The water everyone trusted, the water they drank and cooked with and gave to their children, was the center of the killing. But a pattern is not a proof, and Snow knew it. So he went looking for the exceptions, because the exceptions are where the truth hides. There was a workhouse right in the heart of the dying district, packed with hundreds of people. By the theory of bad air, it should have been a slaughter. Instead, it was barely touched. The workhouse had its own private well. Its people did not drink from the Broad Street pump. There was a brewery on the same street. Its workers, by and large, did not sicken either. And the reason was almost grimly funny. The brewery men were given an allowance of beer. They drank that all day instead of water. They had scarcely touched the pump. And then there was the strangest case of all, the one that settled it in his mind. A widow, living comfortably miles away in Hampstead, far from the foul Soho air, suddenly died of cholera in a clean and airy neighborhood where there was no outbreak at all. It made no sense until Snow looked into her habits. Years before, she had lived near Broad Street, and she had so loved the particular taste of that pump's water that even after moving away, she had it carted to her, by the bottle, regularly. She had drunk Broad Street water in clean Hampstead air. And Broad Street water is what killed her. Her niece, who had visited and shared a glass, died too. There it was. Not the air, the water. The same water, wherever it traveled. On the 7th of September, John Snow took his map and his evidence to the parish officials, the board of guardians responsible for the district. He laid it out for them, and he asked them to do one small, strange thing. He asked them to remove the handle from the Broad Street pump, to simply make it impossible to draw the water. They were skeptical. The idea offended the science of the age, but the dying was so terrible and his case so carefully made that they agreed to try it. The next day, the handle was taken off the pump, and the people of Broad Street could no longer drink from it. The outbreak faded. Now, I will be honest with you, because this story is too often told as a perfect miracle. And the truth is better than the legend. By the time the handle came off, the outbreak was already easing. So many had died or fled that the worst was passing on its own. Removing the handle did not single-handedly stop the plague in one heroic stroke. But that was never really the point. The point was the map. The map had already proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, where the death was coming from. The handle was the conclusion drawn in the open for everyone to see. And there was still one question left. Why was the water poison? What had gotten into that particular well? The answer came from an unlikely partner. A local clergyman, the Reverend Henry Whitehead, who knew those streets and those families intimately, had at first set out to disprove Snow. He believed in the bad air, and he meant to defend it. But he was an honest man, and he did the same patient work Snow had done. He went door to door. He listened. And in the end, his own careful inquiry did not refute John Snow. It completed him. Whitehead traced the outbreak back to its very first case. Before the hundreds, there had been one. A baby girl, only a few months old, in a house at number 40 Broad Street, who had fallen ill with cholera in the last days of August. Her mother, nursing her and washing her, had rinsed the soiled cloths in a pail and emptied the pail, as anyone would, into the cesspool just outside the front door. And that cesspool sat barely 3 feet from the well that fed the Broad Street pump. The brickwork was old and decayed. The one had been quietly leaking into the other. A single sick child and a few feet of crumbling brick had poisoned the water of an entire neighborhood. That was the whole terrible mechanism. No mist, no bad air, just a few feet of earth, and a story so small it had almost gone unnoticed. John Snow did not live to be proven fully right. He died only 4 years later, in 1858, of a stroke at just 45. He went to his grave with much of the medical world still politely certain he had been mistaken about the air. It would be decades more before other scientists found the actual living organism that causes cholera, and the world finally fully understood that he had been right all along. But what he left behind outlived the argument, because John Snow had done something new. He had taken a disease, and instead of guessing at its causes, he had counted and located and mapped and reasoned from the pattern of the real dead to the real source. That method, that patient, map-making, fact-gathering method, became a whole science. We call it epidemiology, the study of how disease moves through a population and how to find where it begins. Every outbreak investigation since has been, in some sense, the children of that map. Every effort to trace a sickness back to its origin, every search for the first case, every quiet question of where did this begin and what do all the sick have in common, follows the path John Snow walked through the streets of Soho. And the lesson at the heart of it became a kind of motto for all of public health. When something is killing people and you cannot yet see why, you do not argue about the air. You find the source, and you take the handle off the pump. Anyone who has cared for the sick knows that the most powerful medicine is often not a cure at all. It is finding the cause and shutting it off at the source before it can reach the next person, and the next. Snow could not cure a single case of cholera. He had nothing in his bag that would have saved them. But by finding where it came from, he saved more lives than any cure of his age ever could. So tonight, when you turn the tap, and the water runs clean and clear and safe, with no thought required at all, you might spare a moment for the quiet doctor who walked the dying streets with a notebook and let the dead point the way home. He was right. They did not believe him. And he saved us anyway. Rest easy. I'll see you in the small hours.